All right, so we're going to talk about my, I guess, reflective discussion for, how I used and possibly extended the Unity toolset in my project tasks. I have a few discussion topics to, kind of stretch on, expand on, and I'll be, rambling on here. So I guess we'll start off with my project organization. So when I work on projects, I like to organize everything, keep them in folders so that everything's with other like systems. Scripts are all kept in one place. Player stuff is here. You got art and assets over in this folder. Etc. etc. So like right now, our project is a little messy as there are multiple of us working on this. Multiple of us are creating new stuff. We've tried to keep it as clean as we could, but there are some people who aren't quite keeping up with it. But we will be once we start this next sprint, we will be fixing, trying to clean this all up so that everything's in, the place that it needs to be. And, you're not looking around in 30 different folders trying to find your scripts or, your art assets. And yeah, it's similar with the hierarchy. Everything's named and dragged into where it needs to be. So with our game, we are also using the newer Unity input system for our character controller with their movement and mining. I don't believe we've really used any advanced features. We did have to figure out how to include the player input component onto our player controller, as we needed it for the split screen multiplayer. But other than that, I don't believe I used any advanced features while working on this project. For how do I manage scenes and prefabs? So basically, if I had to work with prefabs at any time during the project that were already finished, I would, we drag them in, go and unpack the prefab completely so that it's safe to update it, edit it without breaking anything. And then when I was done, we would save it. If it needed to be brought back into a normal prefab, drag it back down. And with scenes, if we wanted to test, if I wanted to test something that, if I was working on the same branch as somebody else and wanted to test something, I would create a brand new scene, go into that scene, and then test everything in there so that I wasn't affecting their work. But for the most part, whenever somebody was doing work, we'd all create our own branches so that we weren't affecting anyone else. So we didn't have to worry too much about the scene management that much. We only have one scene that we're using for our game right now, and everything else is controlled with game states, so that when you're in a specific game state, this UI or these stages will pop up. So next, we're just going to talk about some engine features that I haven't really used before, which again was the player input component for Unity. While we were working with the player controller, Silver, our lead programmer, and I had to refactor the player controller so it would work with the multiplayer, which we had to use the player input component, which I don't think I've ever used before. So that was new to me when I had to work with that. It was interesting to see how it worked. It's fairly similar to how the input system works, but just slightly different. Has a little more settings and stuff that you can choose to just, set up your input action set. Let's see. During this project, I didn't write like any tools, editor extensions, or asset pipeline code. I had no need to do any of that. So nothing like that is included into this. Let's see. Man, really, this is really hard to extend this video to 10 minutes or more. I don't have that much stuff to talk about. Let's see if I can stretch some of this, I guess. I guess I can go a little more into project organization. So we'll go talk on the hierarchy that we use for our project. So for the hierarchy, we have everything named properly so that, you click on it, it'll say, game state manager, and we can tell that is our game state manager. Anything related to that is there. Or if we're looking at the user interface, anything that's there for user interface, UI, that is all dragged in there. And it's the same for everything. Anything that is labeled as a manager, we have it coded in all caps so that you can tell, okay, this is a manager, this is where the important stuff is. I know that now. And everything else is, lowercase. Mm, you know, we have everything named properly so that you can tell, you open something up and it doesn't just say, this is the level and this is a cube. It's properly named to, you know, room 1 with big rock or whatever it's called. It's something that's very easy for everyone to look at and tell that, hey, this is what I'm looking at. This is what it is. And we do the same with our UI. We are working on having everything set up so that when you go to look at it, instead of it just saying, text, it says settings text or whatever it may be. Settings text, info text, back button text, just something to label it so that you can look at it and see, hey, this is where this is what it is. And that is basically that. There's not really too much else for our organization. Again, we do try and keep everything as organized as we can. So each folder would, for just a good example, would be our art assets folder. You open it up and there is multiple other folders. So we have 2D assets, 3D assets, 3D models, animations, materials, player models, prefabs, UI, visual effects, all the different stuff they've worked on are in separate folders so that, if you want to look for a very specific, UI or a specific 3D model, you know exactly where to go to find them. We are working on doing that with our scripts as well. Right now, again, since there's multiple programmers doing multiple scripts, they're kind of all over the place. But we want to have it set up so that we have one main scripts folder and everything else is in there. So, if we have scripts that, are managers, they're in a manager script folder. If there's like environment scripts, they're in there. I believe we'll be setting our player controller scripts into the actual player controller folder, so they will be separate from the other scripts instead of being away from the player. And a lot of our stuff we're going to have to refactor and clean up in our next sprint here, as we've been trying to just throw it all together and haven't had much time to revise and refactor and clean stuff up. Let's see if there's anything else I can think of to talk about here. Yeah, it's a little hard to talk about stuff when we only have a couple points that we're given and I don't know what else to bring up, especially when I didn't do much to extend Unity's toolset, if at all. So I'm gonna have to end this video early because I really can't stretch this any longer. I would like to, I would like to, but I don't have any other points that I can talk about or that I can even think about. So that will be the end of the discussion here. Try to keep project organization as clean as we can. We're using the new Unity input system with our character controller for movement, mining, any sort of player action. Any prefabs we work with, we unpack them completely before we work with them so that we're not messing up somebody else's work. And I didn't really learn any new engine features. We only worked, the only thing I learned was the player input component, as I haven't worked with it before. And I didn't write any tools or editor extensions, asset pipeline code, anything like that to help me with my project tasks. None of that was done, so that wasn't something I had to worry about. And that is realistically my reflective discussion for how I used and possibly extended the Unity toolset in my project tasks. I didn't really do much of that at all. So that's my reflective discussion.